Thank you so much, Deborah Maragopoulos, for coming on Wellness Your Way. I am so excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Megan.
Of course. Well, your bio is very impressive, and the audience has heard the formal side, but please, in your words, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here.
Well, I'm a family nurse practitioner and I specialize in neuro-immune endocrinology. And I started that whole venue, that whole adventure when I gave birth to an intersex child in 1984. And I had to learn hormones. I was, straight out of nursing school, had to learn about hormones to help them navigate through the process of the medical world and, went against medical advice and was kind of a pioneer, and so decided, this, I really love this. I love hormones. I love receptors. I love everything about hormones. So I'm going to go back, become a nurse practitioner, got my master's degree and started a family practice. And then I went into women's health for a little while. And then I started an integrative practice. And in my integrative practice in 97, I basically told the universe I want to learn everything about the neurological, immune, and endocrine systems. And so the universe sent me the worst patients you could possibly imagine. We call them train wrecks in medicine. They had everything wrong with them. So I really started researching on, how I could help them. And I wasn't able to do anything different for them than they were already being served up by their providers. I made it more natural, supplements and diet and exercise and lifestyle, but I couldn't get to the root cause. And until I rediscovered the hypothalamus. And so that's what I am an expert in now is the hypothalamus. And I've been helping my patients focus on optimizing hypothalamic health so that it helps all of their issues.
Well, that's fantastic. And I think it's, as we talked about before we started recording, I think it's so important because you and I, especially you as the expert, know that the hypothalamus basically runs almost everything in our body. And yet it's something that very few people have even heard of. So
Mhm.
let's start with the basics. What even is the hypothalamus for those who don't know?
The hypothalamus is a small gland in your brain. So if you put your fingers right at your in between your eyebrows, it'd be at the third eye, directly in the center of the brain. It's right above the pituitary gland. Most people know that because that little hangy thing looks like a pea hanging on a stalk. So it's hanging from the hypothalamus. It was believed for years that the pituitary gland was the master gland, and that's because we were able to locate it in pigs' brains and lambs' brains and dissect it and find hormones in it. What we didn't know is it was actually storing hormones that the hypothalamus had actually produced. And so it was years later that we really understand the hypothalamus was really the key. Honestly, we didn't understand the hypothalamic control of the neuroimmune endocrine system until like 1969. So it really is a newer field. And the research about the hypothalamus has only been really robust in the last maybe 10 years, which,
Wow.
I've been doing this for 30 something years, but 10 years now, research is proving what I've seen in my patients. So that's super exciting. So the hypothalamus controls your neurological system. It's the gateway to your brain. So moods, memory, your learning, your concentration. It controls your endocrine system. Those are all the hormones you produce from your pineal gland, pituitary, thyroid, the thymus, which controls your immune system, your adrenals, your pancreas, and your gonads, either ovaries or testes. It controls the immune system and the circadian rhythm. It controls your metabolism. Most of the anti-obesity drugs are targeting hypothalamic hormones. Okay, so so the research is kind of going in that direction. It controls how fast you age. Aging starts in the hypothalamus. Metabolic disorders like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, all starts in the hypothalamus. So it's the center of all of those issues. We think of it controlling the hormones, but it's so much more than that. And
Wow.
what's kind of special about the hypothalamus, which means we get access to it, is that it's not protected by the blood-brain barrier. So it's exposed to everything you eat, as well as all the toxins you expose yourself to and all the viruses and the bacteria, what your electrolytes are, if you're hydrated well or dehydrated. It knows everything that's happening, and 4 out of 5 of your senses feed information to the hypothalamus. So
Wow.
it's so important. It gets all the information from everything in your body. It is the gut-brain connection. It's not the brain, it's the gut hypothalamus connection that controls digestion, absorption, immune function, and it's ignored. by
Wow.
medicine. We can't measure the hormones from it, so we kind of ignore it.
It has been ignored until your work hit the scenes. You're doing so much great work to get information about the hypothalamus out there. And I wonder if part of the reason why it's been ignored is because it doesn't act alone. We hear about the hypothalamus in conjunction with all of these other organs or systems of the body. The HPA axis is one that some people might have heard of. We've talked about it on the podcast before. And this is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So, can you talk to people about what an axis even is? What does that mean? And what does it mean that the hypothalamus is working in conjunction with, in this case, these two other organs of our body?
So the hypothalamus, pituitary, any endocrine gland axis, so adrenal, thyroid, gonads, basically is a feedback system. And it's a negative feedback system. So when your hormones are low, let's say your adrenal cortisol levels are low, the hypothalamus is triggered to produce cortico-releasing hormone to tell your pituitary gland to produce ACTH. And that then tells the adrenals to produce cortisol. So if there's too much cortisol, less cortico-releasing hormone. If there's too little cortisol, more cortico-releasing hormone. So it's this constant feedback mechanism. And that is the same for the thyroid. So TSH is what we can measure from the pituitary gland. T4, T3 we can measure from the thyroid. But what we aren't measuring is thyroid releasing hormone because you can't get to the hypothalamus. But that axis is the same. FSH and estrogen, luteinizing hormone and progesterone or testosterone, same axis. Okay, always hypothalamic, pituitary, lower endocrine gland axis. And that's the simple axis because the hypothalamus does a lot of work without having that axis as well. It works through the nervous system too.
That's really interesting. So, as I'm running lab work, of course, I can run in your example TSH, T3, T4, but it never even occurred to me that there was a step before that that I can't measure. So, is that because that hormone just goes straight to the pituitary? It's not released throughout the bloodstream. That's why we can't measure it?
That's exactly it. So the majority of the hypothalamic hormones cannot be picked up in the bloodstream.
Okay.
Okay. So for instance, the very first hypothalamic hormone that was discovered in the early 1900s, oxytocin. It
Mhm.
was not discovered in the hypothalamus, it was discovered in the uterus.
Mm,
It causes uterine contractions.
yes.
So they thought it was a uterine hormone, but it's actually produced in the hypothalamus.
Interesting.
Okay, so oxytocin and vasopressin is what controls your blood pressure through salt water balance, is also floating around in the bloodstream because it targets lower, but it's produced in the hypothalamus. So those are the only two hormones we can really measure that are hypothalamic. And they're very circadian and they're very situational. Okay, you
Right.
get a lot high oxytocin levels when you're nursing a baby or you're going through labor or you've just had an orgasm. But other than that, those levels are very situational.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, so now people are starting to hear, wow, it has everything to do with my reproductive system, my thyroid, my stress management, my digestion, my brain, all of this. I feel like this question might be impossible to answer, but let's give it a shot. What symptoms might someone have if their hypothalamus is out of balance?
So if you have any endocrine issues, you either have a low thyroid, low adrenal, high adrenal, you're infertile, you're missing your periods, you're a man who has infertility issues or hypogonadism, meaning you're not making enough testosterone, a woman with PCOS, anybody going through the change, menopause, perimenopause, andropause. So all of those hormonal issues, all of those symptoms are, the core is hypothalamic. The core is the hypothalamus being out of balance. If you have pain syndrome issues, particularly trigger point pain, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and the majority of autoimmune issues are rooted in the hypothalamus. If you have nervous system issues, including Parkinson's and different neurological issues like multiple sclerosis, hypothalamic. Depression, anxiety, any other mood disorders are based in the hypothalamus. Insomnia is based in the hypothalamus, as well as metabolic issues, like you have very low energy, you're fatigued, or hyperactivity, learning disabilities, dementia, all based in the hypothalamus. Okay, you're
Wow.
vulnerable to diseases. You get sick all the time, or you have a hypersensitive immune system. You're allergic to everything, or you have food sensitivities. That's based in the hypothalamus. And the irritable bowel issues, whether it's constipation, diarrhea, it's all hypothalamic driven because the hypothalamus is what talks to the gut. So the really low temperature, high temperature, hot flashes, there really isn't much the hypothalamus isn't controlling.
That's really interesting. Talk to me about the hyperactive immune system, like you said, in allergies or autoimmune. Is that because of the relation to the thymus, or what's the relation there? Yes?
So the thymus is an endocrine gland as well, but we don't consider it a traditional endocrine gland. So what controls the thymus is hypothalamic prolactin production. Now we've always believed prolactin was produced by the pituitary, but in this case, the pituitary gland is storing prolactin
Okay.
and the hypothalamus produces it. And the hypothalamus only produces it at super high levels at night for
Mm.
about 8 hours. What turns off prolactin is hypothalamic dopamine. So when you wake up in the morning, because the sun is coming up and the melatonin's dropped, you get this surge of dopamine, which then turns off the prolactin production. So if you have high levels at night of prolactin, what that does is it actually tells your thymus to program white blood cells called T lymphocytes to know the difference between you and other. If you
Mm.
don't have enough prolactin at night, you're not going to have an immune system that functions well. And that usually is because you're not sleeping very well at night. You're not sleeping in the dark. You're not getting that full night's sleep. If your prolactin is dyscircadian and it's high during the day and low at night, you're going to attack yourself, autoimmunity.
Interesting. Wow. So I'm hearing sleep has a lot to do with this. Give
Mhm.
us your take on sleep and the hypothalamus.
So the hypothalamus is very sensitive to light. It picks up information from your eyes, your vision. It also picks up information from cytochromes from the cells in your skin that pick up light. So even if you're in the complete dark and you've got like an eye mask on, but if we shine a light at the back of your knee, the hypothalamus will pick that up and tell the pineal gland to turn off the melatonin. We think the
Wow.
pineal gland is controlling the day-night cycles, but it's the hypothalamus that's controlling it because the pineal gland only does that one thing. It produces that melatonin. It converts serotonin into melatonin. But the hypothalamus has to decide how much melatonin is going to be produced and then turn all of the other nocturnal hormones on and all the daytime hormones off. So we don't want cortisol surging at night. That needs to be low. Okay. You can have reproductive hormones in the evening time, but most of the things are low because what's happening at night is you're cleaning house. Your
Yeah.
immune system is at a high functioning level. Prolactin also anesthetizes you. It makes so you don't feel the pain of destroying cells that have gone rogue and might be precancerous.
Mm.
Okay. And all that inflammation that's going on. That has to happen every night. So if
Yeah.
you don't get good sleep in the dark for enough hours for your age, which for most adults is 7 to 9 hours, you're not going to have an immune system that's functioning optimally.
Really interesting. Okay, great. I would love to dive in more there, but I think I know what our audience is curious about because anytime we say estrogen or ovaries or anything like that, we get the ears to perk up. And you did mention several times the connection between the reproductive system and the hypothalamus. So let's get into this a little bit. Let's
Mhm.
start with estrogen dominance, a hot topic these days, a hotly debated topic. How does the hypothalamus relate to this?
So estrogen dominance basically means that you're not producing enough progesterone to counterbalance your estrogen. You'll never produce so little progesterone unless you're menopausal. You'll never have only estrogen. So right as you're going from perimenopause into menopause, there's a period where you have pretty much mostly estrogen and very little progesterone. But during your reproductive years, you will always make more progesterone. It needs to be 10 to 50 times more than estrogen. So
Wow.
if it's less than 10 times more than estrogen, you're estrogen dominant.
Mm,
Okay. So
yeah.
double the amount of progesterone to estrogen is estrogen dominance.
Okay.
So one of the issues with the hypothalamus is it's controlling your what's called gonadotropin releasing hormone. And gonadotropin releasing hormone is the hormone that the hypothalamus produces to tell the pituitary gland to either produce more FSH to stimulate estrogen production or luteinizing hormone to stimulate ovulation and then progesterone production. So the hypothalamus is reading how much estradiol and progesterone is floating around in the female's bloodstream. Okay. It's also reading testosterone as well. So what's happening is if you have fertility issues, if you have irregular periods, et cetera, that's usually because you're not making enough progesterone, which usually means your adrenal glands are stealing a lot of that progesterone because
Yeah.
progesterone is used to make cortisol. And
Yes.
normally your adrenals make about 5% of your progesterone needs, which means 95% of your progesterone during high stress levels are coming from your ovaries. So it's being stolen from the ovaries to make cortisol to get you away from danger. Okay. Which means now estrogen is dominant because the
Yeah.
adrenals don't deal with the estrogen at all. Estrogen becomes dominant to progesterone because all of that's being converted over to cortisol. So that's one issue with estrogen dominance, which has to do with the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis,
Hmm.
that the hypothalamus is really about your survival. Its main job is called homeostasis, keeping everything balanced. So if you need to run away from a tiger, you don't need to reproduce right now.
Right.
Okay. So all of that energy is going towards actually fueling adrenal response or stress hormone response.
Yes, very interesting. So I want to rehash that to make sure that the audience gets it and make sure we're clear on this. When you're in a period of high stress, of the vast majority of the progesterone that could have been produced and utilized is going towards the adrenal well, let's call them just adrenaline and cortisol in this case. Particularly cortisol is being manufactured in excess, and that makes progesterone so low because there's no quote building blocks to make the progesterone, and then progesterone's out of balance with estrogen, so we have this state called estrogen dominance. And this is what people hear about. Oh, I'm bloated, I'm moody, it feels like I have PMS all the time. It might be because your system, starting with your hypothalamus, is on overdrive in a hyper stress state. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. And a classic example is the bride getting her period on her wedding day. Okay.
Interesting.
So she's
Okay.
very stressed. She's ovulating. She's healthy. She wants to get pregnant this first year. Okay.
Yeah.
She's great. But she's so stressed about the wedding, because she's ovulating, she's producing enough progesterone, but it's all being taken by the adrenal glands. So her
Yeah.
ovaries are producing it. The adrenal glands are taking it to deal with the stress of bridesmaids and mother-in-laws and everything else going into that wedding. And she ends up having her period early or late. She planned that wedding
Mm,
for her perfect little cycle, and then she has the period early or late because of the progesterone issue.
really interesting. So I was thinking of it more in terms of chronic cortisol overproduction,
That
but
could
what
happen
you're saying
acutely.
is maybe it could happen even in one cycle.
Oh yeah, it can absolutely happen acutely. Absolutely happen
Interesting.
acutely.
Wow. Okay. So if someone were in this state, they're thinking, oh, yes, this is exactly what's happening to me. I'm stressed. I feel this estrogen dominance. What would you guide them to do about it?
Well, my focus with my patients and my customers is get to the root issue. And the root issue, your hypothalamus HPA axis is overstimulated. Okay. You're not really being chased by a tiger. Your stress response is over the top.
Yeah.
Okay. We need to calm that down. So supporting the hypothalamus nutraceutically helps to balance out that HPA axis, allows the ovaries to be producing more progesterone and get those periods back in balance, your fertility back in balance, helps your thyroid function better, your metabolism function better, and you feel less stressed. You feel calmer. That's because the hypothalamus is getting everything it needs to produce not only the proper hormones, but also the proper neurotransmitters to calm down your nervous system.
Amazing. So when it comes to nourishing our hypothalamus, I know you have a line of supplements, which I'd love for you to talk about, but what are some of those nutraceuticals that the hypothalamus really needs?
So research shows us that the hypothalamus is very dependent on amino acids, particularly essential amino acids, and what we call conditionally essential amino acids. Conditionally essential amino acids are amino acids you could make, but when you're under stress, you need a lot more of it and you can't keep up.
Yes.
So having those amino acids at an abundant supply during times of stress or just as a maintenance can keep your hypothalamus very, very happy. Okay. It also needs PUFAs, especially omega-3 rich polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFAs. So I find that sea vegetation has like the highest levels of omega-3 fatty acids that the hypothalamus just adores. You
Mm.
can get it in other ways, but that gives you a really nice blend of those PUFAs. And then certain phytonutrients coming from botanicals, so herbs and plants, especially whole plant foods, but also herbs, all the things that you probably have been taken with, over the counter because you've seen it was healthy for you, or some naturopaths told you to take it to support your adrenals, thyroid. All of those things are great, but in micro doses, it's like food for the hypothalamus. In macro doses, it's pushing hypothalamic buttons. So
Mm.
you're telling your hypothalamus, I want more cortisol or less cortisol. Okay. Instead of the hypothalamus having a potpourri of nutrients to say, okay, right now we're trying to make a baby. So it's all going this direction. Or right now we're trying to calm down our stress. Or right now we're really fighting the aging process. And the ovaries are giving up and we're entering menopause. So I'm going to have to like get all these resources to preserve brain function and heart function. Does that make
Yes.
sense? So the
Yes.
hypothalamus needs all of these different nutrients, which most of us don't get enough in our diets, even when we eat pristinely. It's just
Mhm.
hard to get all of those different nutrients.
Yeah, in the right combinations too, because I
Exactly.
know people are thinking, "Oh, amino acids, well, I eat protein, I'm fine." And that's true, right? Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. However, giving specific doses of the essential and conditionally essential in that example and this other blend of nutraceuticals, I think is really important. So, is the product in your line, is there a certain name of this product, or is there a
Mhm.
certain product people would take if they're in this stage of estrogen dominance?
So Genesis Gold is my foundational product that helps the hypothalamus get back in balance. And it also has all the phytonutrients in it that allows for your receptor sites to actually function normally. So estrogen dominance is not just about too much estrogen. It's also about an overstimulation of estrogen receptors, those little doorways into the cells that allow the estrogen in. So getting those receptors to function optimally, as well as the hypothalamus to function optimally, is key to controlling those hormone levels. It's the same with insulin resistance. Part of what Genesis Gold does with insulin resistance is it actually helps hypothalamic insulin resistance. The hypothalamus becomes insulin resistant too. It improves the autonomic nervous system, which is triggering the pancreas to produce so much insulin, but it's also improving receptor site activity at the cellular level. So
Amazing.
we're working at all of those different levels to try to get things balanced.
That's really
Yeah.
great. Okay. So we've tackled estrogen dominance. Let's talk about perimenopause, menopause, anything you want related to this as it relates to the hypothalamus.
So the most interesting thing about the hypothalamus is that during the change, so when you go from high reproductive hormone levels to they start to deplete, that depletion really triggers hypothalamic dysfunction. And hypothalamic dysfunction is, I believe, at the core of most of our disease processes. Now, if you catch strep throat and you get strep pharyngitis, that's an actual bacteria. That's not hypothalamic. But if you have an autoimmune condition, you're hypothyroid, you have adrenal fatigue, you're infertile, those are all the core of those issues are based in the hypothalamus. But menopause, perimenopause, and menopause are really hypothalamic dysfunction. The temperature dysregulation, the hot flashes, the night sweats, the cold chills, that's all hypothalamic dysfunction. The insomnia that you have, the aging that you're seeing in your skin, your vagina, etc., are all part of that hypothalamic process as well. And you're going to see issues with fatigue. You just don't have the energy you used to. And that's part of the hypothalamus process as well, because it's controlling how much energy your mitochondria is putting out.
Mm.
So, and then the other thing that's really, really concerning and new in research is that the gonadotropin releasing hormone that controls follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which then controls estrogen and progesterone production from the ovaries, it not only controls reproduction, it actually controls neurogenesis. And neurogenesis is making new nerves. So your brain starts to deteriorate when you no longer make gonadotropin releasing hormone.
Wow.
So it's really important the hypothalamus gets as much support as possible. If you could start in premenopause, those 10 years before you start losing all of those ovum, The earlier you start, the better. If you don't start till post-menopause, you're still going to support the hypothalamus, so you're less likely to develop chronic illnesses.
Wow. Really interesting. And would that be the same Genesis Gold that's through
Yes.
all stages of this?
Yes, so I use the Genesis Gold as the foundation, but I have, so they're the amino acids that are in Genesis Gold, I call the sacred 7 amino acids, because they actually came to me in dreams.
Wow.
I had the same dream for 3 months, but the first 7 nights were 7 sets of amino acids that I put together and made the sacred 7 amino acids. So
Wow.
that's in Genesis Gold, but I also packaged it separately for people who have any kind of sensitivities to plant-based foods that are in Genesis Gold. No one's going to be sensitive to the amino acids unless you have PKU. There
Yeah.
is phenylalanine in there. So it's the likelihood of being sensitive to this free form of plant-derived amino acids is highly unlikely. So it's kind of the allergen-free version of hypothalamic support. So when you have severe menopausal symptoms, you are having severe rage, severe mood disorders, insomnia is horrible, and your night sweats and hot flashes are horrible. I'll have my patients and customers take extra sacred 7 on top of the Genesis Gold for a few months just to give the hypothalamus even more support.
Got it.
Okay. So,
Yes.
so yes. So what does that look like? When I was going through my own hormonal challenges well, all through my life, but at the end of my 30s, I was on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. My body fat was really low because I had bulimia during college, but then exercise became my obsession.
Mm.
And my body fat was so low, I wasn't having any menstrual cycles at all. So I put myself on bioidentical hormones. When I started to create the product, the first thing I could create was the sacred 7 amino acids because I get those pretty easily. The rest of all those botanicals it took me 3 more years to be able to manufacture that. So I immediately started myself on that, took myself off bioidenticals, and I took myself off all of my other supplements. And I had about 54 patients from 16 to 80 something actually do this research with me. Okay. So we all like did this together. What I found is within about a month and a half, I gained 5 pounds, which is the same 5 pounds I gained to conceive both of my children. I was underweight for both of them,
Mm.
dreamt I was going to get pregnant, end up gaining 5 pounds and getting pregnant for each of them. And I
Wow.
got back down to my base, crazy, way too low weight. So
Right.
obviously that extra 5 pounds was my hypothalamic ideal. This is what I need. If you want hormones, I need this extra little weight here. This
Right.
is too low. Okay.
Yes.
So I gained that weight. And then in the second month of taking this, I had my first period uninduced by hormones since I started my periods at the age of 14. So now I'm
Wow.
like 39 years old. I had my first period. I had regular periods until I was in my early 50s and didn't go through absolute menopause till 56. I
Amazing.
was taking Genesis Gold this whole time. Now,
Wow.
my sisters, who are younger than I, went through the menopause in their mid 40s.
Mm.
My mother was mid 50s. So I kind of followed what we should have all gone through. And we
Right.
ate the same. We're Italian, Mediterranean diets all our life. Maybe we didn't deal with stress in the same way. Okay. All of us are super active. All of us have very similar, body types, etc. They had a little more body fat, so they had normal periods. I didn't. But other than that, we were pretty similar, except I was supporting my hypothalamus all of those years. So
Really
I think
interesting.
it pushed off I had all those eggs saved up. I just wasn't using them. It pushed off my menopause for 10 years after
Wow.
what I would have went through if I would have followed their pattern.
Yes. And so in this ideal state where our hypothalamus is well nourished and has the nutrients it needs, what should menopause feel like? Obviously, it's the cessation of menstrual periods, but what symptoms are what you would call, quote,
Normal.
acceptable, yes, or normal versus no, that's not. We should do something about this.
So it's normal to feel a little moodier because estrogen helps to control serotonin production, which is your happy, more joyful hormone. And progesterone controls GABA production, which is the calm. So the little irritability and the moodiness um, is pretty normal.
Yeah.
It's going to be blunted though if you're supporting your hypothalamus. You're pretty good, and you can catch yourself and
Yeah.
know what you need to do. A little dark chocolate can boost that serotonin. Little deep breathing can boost that GABA so that you start to learn things you can do. Your temperature will still be dysregulated, but the hot flashes won't be horrible. I never really got severe hot flashes the entire time. An occasional night sweat, it usually is induced by drinking alcohol
Mm-hmm.
after dinner. I can
Yeah.
pretty much guarantee I'm going to wake up a little sweaty in the middle of the night. If I didn't have the alcohol, no problem. Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll find things that work. Wasn't terrible, but just enough. It's like, well, I'm going to choose to wake up in the middle of the night if I'm going to have this glass of wine.
Right. At least you
Yeah.
know, though, it's your
Yeah, but you
decision.
know your body, and it's kind of, it's a gentle. One of the other things is because you're still producing enough, you're getting enough adrenal support because the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is well supported. You're still producing enough DHEA that's converting into testosterone, so you have a pretty good sex drive, and estrogen, estradiol, so you're still pretty moist.
Mm,
Your vagina is moist. And I got to say, another thing is, I still don't need to wear reading glasses at the age of 63. So
wow.
what that tells me is the cells in my eyes have not changed much. And your eyes are like one big cell. So the health of your eyes, which we can look in, I can look into someone's eyes with magnification at the back of their macula and see their blood vessels and all kinds of things. It gives us so much information about other cellular health. So that juiciness of those cells is part of having enough hormones on board to keep the cells healthy so they can get toxins out, nutrition in. But as you get older and you don't have all the hormones you need to keep them healthy, they become like raisins. You know that because you get dry lips and dry eyes and dry vagina. But that's
Yes.
happening to your cells too, your brain, everywhere. So that's another sign that things are healthier.
Really interesting. I know that people are on board with the hypothalamus now because you have laid out so many compelling cases. So let's talk about two sides. First, what are some things that we do, we as a society do that damage our hypothalamus, or maybe not damage, but put it out of balance, that keep our hypothalamus from operating optimally?
Well, the first thing we do that we have some control of, but not 100%, is our toxic exposure.
Yeah.
Heavy metals, pesticides, certain drugs, definitely illicit chemicals, recreational drugs affect the hypothalamus in a negative way.
Yeah.
Viruses, bacterium can also affect the hypothalamus. But the main thing, and a lot of that we can't control,
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to expose yourself to radiation. You don't want to be, eating too much toxic elements,
Right.
cooking in, with lead and, all of that. So try to control it. With hypothalamic support, you detox a little bit better. Okay. So that's one piece. The other piece is most of us overnourish ourselves.
Mhm.
Overnutrition is very damaging to the hypothalamus. It's actually one of the big research projects now, from mice to humans. You eat too much fat and you eat too much sugar, it causes microinflammation in the hypothalamus.
Mm,
Hypothalamic inflammation is the root of dysfunction, of hypothalamic dysfunction, and causes all kinds of issues with, insulin resistance and diabetes and chronic illnesses. So overnutrition is huge. And, especially here in the United States, we eat too much.
yeah.
Okay. Inactivity also affects the hypothalamus, and not getting enough sleep affects the hypothalamus.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, so everyone, I like to think we all have a little flashing indicator inside our body. For some, when you say sleep, or for someone you say overnutrition, or some inactivity, they're like, oh, yeah, there's a little room for improvement there. So listen to that indicator. And then on the flip side, what are some things that we can do to support it? In addition to nourishing it with Genesis Gold, what are some other things we can do to support our hypothalamus?
Well, I'm a huge fan of the Mediterranean diet because it does provide enough of the base nutrition for the hypothalamus. It's plant-based, it's lower in saturated fats, it's more monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, whole grains. You get enough protein for your lean body mass. I'm not a huge fan of vegan diets because I think we do need some protein for our lean body mass, especially going into the change. You do not want to lose muscle and bone.
Yeah.
Okay. And it provides enough fat, but it's healthy fats. And
Yes.
it's fairly easy. And I'm not talking about pizza and pasta all the time.
Right.
Okay. our plates that we make, my husband's Greek, that's the Maragopoulos. I'm Italian from a Diodato side of the family. So
Wow.
we eat a lot of vegetables. There's a
Yes.
lot, and they're all different colors of vegetables. And we always usually have a protein, but maybe not. Legumes can be protein as well. And our biggest meal is lunch.
Mm,
And we eat lighter in the evening. So I'm not a fan of intermittent fasting. I'm a fan of circadian fasting.
great.
So
Tell us
slow
more.
down that caloric intake after dusk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and wake up hungry, which is a good healthy hypothalamic response, and means that you're probably not insulin resistant if you wake
Yeah.
up hungry. Remember being a little kid and getting out of bed and you're starving and your mom threw cereal at you to just get you to, because
Yes.
that's healthy glucose metabolism, to wake up starving.
Yeah.
Okay, so wake up and break the fast,
Yep.
and then eat your biggest meal in the middle of the day, and then very light in the evening.
Great.
Okay, so that's my perfect nutrition plan. And then you need to be active, and daytime activity is great. Nighttime activity, not so much so, because it raises cortisol levels.
Yeah.
So you want to get your exercise in during the day. And if we were back 150 years ago and you had a farm and did hard construction work and you didn't exercise, you didn't need to, but we're not doing that now. We sit on our butts a lot.
Yep.
We need to move. So you need to have some formal exercise in your life. Okay. And it
Yes.
doesn't matter what you do to get your heart rate up. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
You just need to get it up at least a few times a week. And you need to do, like, I love the LSDs, long, slow distances. We called them I was track and field. And that is when you're burning fat. That is when your metabolism is really set. Those are the long hikes, the long bike rides, the long swims, the things you're doing at a slower heart rate, but for at least 45 minutes. So you've gone through your glycogen stores in your muscle and liver. And now you're going into your fat stores. It trains your body to start looking at your fat for energy whenever it's needed. Okay. If you never do long, slow distances, you don't go into fat stores.
Yeah. Amazing.
And at least once a week. And then, of course, stretching. And then weight resistance is important because it stimulates the mitochondrial activity in your muscles, where your muscles have the most mitochondria. And the more mitochondrial activity you have, the more the hypothalamus reads you as young.
Yes.
Okay. And if it reads you as youthful, it's going to support you with more thyroid hormone and adrenal hormone and sex hormones. If you're still able to make them, everything's going to be healthier.
Mm,
Okay. And then
amazing.
some kind of stress reduction. Your mindset affects your hypothalamus. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So some kind of stress reduction, whether, you need counseling, you need to learn deep breathing, you need to change your attitude. I mean, you can't take enough Genesis Gold. I can't dip you in enough bioidentical hormones, the perfect diet, the perfect exercise program, if you don't believe that you ever will heal.
Yes.
Okay. So it's a mindset shift into healing that actually will help your hypothalamus do the job that it needs to do to help you survive and thrive.
Yes. That's so powerful, and people really need to hear that. So thank you for that. And maybe with all those tips that you just said, you can pick out a few of your favorite, or give us different ones. But I'd love to hear, in your personal routine, what are a couple things you do that really make you feel your best?
Well, I try to get up with the sun. That
Great.
really helps. I try to get to bed fairly early, like between 9 and 10. Okay. Try not to be on a screen after dusk. Read a real
Awesome.
book. Okay.
Yes.
Because that light from the screen affects melatonin production. I
Yeah.
have a bedtime routine to tell my hypothalamus to start going into nocturnal mode. Get those jammies on, have a hot cup of tea, take a warm bath. Don't watch any or read any kind of crazy news, like nothing stimulating. Just
Right.
calm down, bring it down so that you can sleep through the night. I tend to journal in the morning and try to capture my dreams, which I have very vivid dreams and remember them. But that's actually a good sign you're making enough dopamine. So keep a
Mm,
little dream journal, even if you can catch the emotions. It'll help you to actually process what was going on during the day as well. Mostly they're symbolic, but it really helps to connect the dots in terms of your nerves and how your brain functions. So that's when my sleep and activity is, and I try to get exercise in the morning. I almost never exercise late in the day. ever, like never after dusk. So I usually exercise between 8 and 11 in the morning,
Awesome.
and vigorously. And just lately I started doing more conditioning type classes for time purposes, and also because my 63-year-old knees don't want to run anymore. I put
Yeah.
thousands of miles on them, and I'm just noticing a huge difference in, and this isn't heavy weights. This is
Right.
like dance-based conditioning and, core conditioning, but I've noticed a big difference in lean body mass. And so after
Amazing.
menopause in my 60s, shifting and gaining lean body mass is huge.
Yes.
It's that, I mean, that is just huge. And it's helped with aches and pains and flexibility. And so conditioning is really, really key.
That's amazing. And so many people hear it's not possible to gain muscle or shift body composition after menopause. It is possible.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've had women come to me with severe osteoporosis, usually from eating disorders or malnutrition coming into menopause. And it was always believed that once you reached a certain bone density, we were never going to gain it. We're just going to stop any more loss. We've reversed it. Now
Yeah.
it was work. It was
Right.
work. We had
Yeah. It's not
hypothalamic
easy.
support. They did get hormones because I'm trying to build that bone,
Yeah.
and activity, the right type of activity, and enough protein and fat, nutrition. But we've actually reversed it to the point where radiologists are like, okay, is this the same patient? I'm like, yeah, we've been working on this for 5 years. Make it work,
Amazing.
So how committed are you to, getting your body back and
Yes.
getting
Yes.
strong? And if you're a young woman, young man, I think most of your listeners are women.
Yeah.
It's never too late to start, but start early. The earlier you can start, the better.
That's
The better.
right. Oh, this has been so fantastic. I am 100% sure people want to learn more about what you have to offer. So tell us where they would find you, where they would learn more about you.
So if you go to my website, which is genesisgold.com, you'll find all kinds of information about the products, but I have a huge blog, a YouTube channel that has all kinds of information. You just search, and whatever your issue is, search. And I have probably did a video, a blog post on it. I also have a free hormone reboot training, which you can join. So there'll be a pop-up on the site, which will allow you to join that. It's based on my first book, Hormones in Harmony, not on my Hypothalamus handbook. And it's a little easier, kind of the beginning steps to understanding the neuroimmune endocrine system. Lots of graphics and pictures, lots of storytelling of different patients I've had. Names have been changed so that you can see yourself and see, oh, okay, here's my connection. And it just allows you to go through that whole process. It's a video-based book course.
That's great. What was the
And
name of that first book?
it's called Hormones in Harmony, and the group is called the Hormone Reboot Training.
That's great. I will put as many links as I possibly can fit in the show notes. So everyone scroll down and find some information, learn more from Deborah with all of the wonderful tidbits that she's put out there into the world. So, one more time, thank you so much, Deborah, for coming on Wellness Your Way. I very much appreciate you being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you.